welcome to our channel. Prepare to be captivated by Shadows of Ravenswood, a thrilling journey into the heart of a small town harboring dark secrets and supernatural forces. Join Mara Chen, a skeptical documentary filmmaker, as she arrives in Ravenswood to investigate a series of mysterious disappearances. As Mara delves deeper into the town's enigmatic past, she uncovers a web of ancient rituals, hidden chambers, and malevolent entities that challenge her rational worldview. With each revelation, the line between reality and the supernatural blurs, forcing Mara to confront her own beliefs and fears. Will Mara unravel the truth behind Ravenswood's dark legacy? Can she save the town from an awakening evil that threatens to consume everything in its path? Join us on this pulse-pounding adventure where courage, determination, and the power of human spirit are put to the ultimate test. Stay tuned for a tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last word. Shadows of Ravenswood, where the past never truly dies, and the darkness is always waiting to reclaim what it has lost. Mara Chen gripped a worn steering wheel of the rented SUV as she navigated the winding, overgrown roads leading into the small town of Ravenswood. Beside her, the members of her documentary film crew shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting about as they took in the eerie silence and the towering, shadowy trees that seemed to close in around them. "I don't like this place, Mara Cassie," the sound engineer murmured. "There's something ... off about it." Mara spared her a brief glance, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We're here to investigate, remember? We can't let a little atmosphere get in the way of the story." The crew had come to Ravenswood to document the town's recent rash of mysterious disappearances, a task that had piqued Mara's analytical, skeptical nature. As a seasoned documentary filmmaker, she thrived on uncovering the truth, even when it challenged the boundaries of rational explanation. "But what if there's nothing to find?" Cassie persisted. "What if these disappearances are just ... normal?" Mara's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "There's always a story, Cassie. We just have to dig deep enough to find it." The SUV rounded a bend, and the town of Ravenswood came into view, a sprawling collection of crumbling Victorian-era structures, their weathered facades sting long shadows across the overgrown streets. An eerie stillness permeated the air, as if the very atmosphere of the place was holding its breath. "Jesus," muttered Nate, the cameraman, from the back seat. "It's like a ghost town." Mara felt a tingle of anticipation. "Perfect. Let's get started." She pulled the SUV onto the main street and brought it to a stop in front of a dilapidated general store, its windows boarded up and its door hanging ajar. The crew piled out, their footsteps crunching on the gravel as they gathered their equipment. "All right, Team," Mara announced, shouldering her backpack. "Let's start with some establishing shots, then we'll see if we can find someone willing to talk to us." As they began to set up their gear, a figure emerged from the shadows of the store's entryway. Mara straightened, her brow furrowing, as a tall, well-dressed man stepped forward, a polite smile on his face. "Welcome to Ravenswood," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "I'm James Holloway, the town historian. I couldn't help but notice you've arrived." Mara studied him for a moment, her natural skepticism at odds with the man's disarming demeanor. "I'm Mara Chen, and this is my crew. We're here to investigate the recent disappearances." James nodded, his expression turning slightly solemn. "Ah, yes, the vanishings. Tragic, truly tragic," he gestured toward the dilapidated storefront. "If you're looking for information, perhaps I could be of assistance. I know this town and its history better than anyone." Mara considered his offer, her mind already formulating a plan of attack. "That would be appreciated, Mr. Holloway. We're eager to learn all we can about Ravenswood." "Excellent," James inclined his head. "Please, allow me to show you around. I'm sure you'll find the town fascinating, if not a bit ... unsettling." As Mara and her crew followed James down the cracked sidewalk, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. There was something about the historian's measured demeanor and the town's eerie silence that set her nerves on edge. But she pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that she was here to uncover the truth, no matter how unpalatable it might be. The group passed by a series of boarded-up storefronts, their once vibrant signs now faded and weathered. Mara couldn't help but notice the curious lack of activity. No pedestrians, no cars, not even a stray dog to break the oppressive stillness. "Where is everyone?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. James glanced over his shoulder, an enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "Ah, yes, the town does seem rather deserted, doesn't it? Many of the residents have chosen to keep to themselves of late." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the towering steeple of a dilapidated church in the distance. "But I'm sure they'll come out of their hiding places soon enough." Mara felt a chill run down her spine, and she quickened her pace to catch up with James. "And what about the disappearances? Can you tell us anything about those?" The historian's expression darkened. "I'm afraid the details are rather disturbing. Perhaps it would be best if I showed you the evidence firsthand." He gestured toward a crumbling Victorian mansion at the end of the street. "That is where the latest victim was last seen." Mara exchanged a glance with her crew, their unease mirroring her own. But she steeled her resolve, determined to uncover the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. As they approached the mansion, Mara couldn't help but notice the sudden flicker of a curtain in an upstairs window. A brief glimpse of a shadowy figure that seemed to vanish as quickly as it had appeared. "Did you see that?" Cassie whispered, her voice trembling. Mara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yeah, I saw it." She turned to James, her eyes narrowing. "What was that?" The historian's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure it was nothing. Perhaps merely a trick of the light." He gestured toward the mansion's front door. "Shall we?" Mara hesitated for a moment, her instinct screaming at her to turn back. But her thirst for the truth won out, and she followed James up the crumbling steps, her crew close behind.
As the door creaked open, Mara felt a chill pass through her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Something dark and unseen was lurking in the shadows of Ravenswood, and she was determined to uncover its secrets, no matter the cost.
Mara Chen strode through the dimly lit streets of Ravenswood, her eyes scanning the crumbling Victorian-era buildings that lined the narrow roads. The town's silence was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. A sense of unease crept up her spine, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her documentary crew followed closely behind, their footsteps echoing in the eerie stillness. Mara could feel their growing discomfort, the tension palpable in the air. "Keep your eyes peeled," she murmured, her voice low and steady. "Something's not right here." They made their way to the town's modest community center, where Mara had arranged to interview some of the local residents about the recent disappearances. As they approached the building, the doors swung open, and a middle-aged woman greeted them with a forced smile. "Welcome to Ravenswood," she said, her words laced with an underlying nervousness. "I'm Sarah, the town librarian. I'll be assisting you with your interviews today." Mara nodded, offering the woman a polite smile. "Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate your help. I'm eager to learn more about the town's history and these recent disappearances." The librarian's expression darkened momentarily, a flash of unease crossing her features. "The past is best left undisturbed," she murmured, before turning and leading them inside. As Mara and her crew settled into the small conference room, Sarah began to share what limited information she could provide. "The disappearances have been troubling, to say the least. Several of our young people have gone missing over the past few months, with no trace of them left behind." Mara leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "And the authorities have no leads." Sarah shook her head, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. "The police have investigated, but they've come up empty-handed. The families are at a loss and the town is, well, it's unsettled." "Unsettled," Mara repeated, her gaze narrowing. "What exactly do you mean by that?" The librarian hesitated, her eyes darting around the room, as if she were afraid of being overheard. "There are whispers among the locals, rumors about the town's past, and the darkness that still lingers here." Mara felt a chill run down her spine, and she exchanged a discreet glance with her crew. "Darkness?" she probed, her voice low and measured. "What kind of darkness?" Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line and she shook her head. "I can't say. The past is best left buried, Miss Chen. It's not for outsiders to uncover." Frustrated by the woman's evasiveness, Mara pressed on. But these disappearances are clearly connected to something. Surely you must have some idea of what's happening here. The librarian's expression hardened, and she stood abruptly. I've said all I can. If you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. Without another word, she turned and hurried out of the room, leaving Mara and her crew in a stunned silence. Mara sighed, running a hand through her hair. Well, that was enlightening. One of the cameramen, a young man named Jake, leaned forward. She's hiding something, Mara. And I don't think we're going to get much else out of her. Mara nodded, her gaze thoughtful. Then we'll just have to find another way to uncover the truth. She stood, gesturing for the crew to follow. Come on, let's see what else we can dig up around this town. As they made their way through the quiet streets, Mara couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. The town's residents were clearly hiding something, and she was determined to find out what it was. Her rational mind rebelled against the idea of anything supernatural being at play, but the strange occurrences and the locals' evasiveness were slowly chipping away at her skepticism. They wandered through the town's main square, passing by the dilapidated storefronts and overgrown gardens. Mara paused, her gaze drawn to an old newspaper stand, its yellowed headlines barely visible through the dust-caked glass. Hold on, she murmured, stepping closer to examine the weathered articles. Her eyes widened as she read the faded text, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages. What is it? Jake asked, peering over her shoulder. These articles, Mara breathed. They're talking about a series of disappearances that happened in Ravenswood decades ago. And the language they use, she shook her head, a frown creasing her brow. It sounds an awful lot like what's happening now. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the town's history settling over them like a heavy shroud. Do you think it's related? One of the sound technicians, a woman named Olivia, asked quietly. Mara chewed on her lip, her mind racing. I don't know, but I intend to find out. She turned to the rest of the crew, her expression resolute. We need to dig deeper. There's something going on in this town, and I'm not leaving until we uncover the truth. As they continued their investigation, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to lengthen, and the air grew thick with an oppressive sense of unease. Glances were exchanged, and the crew's footsteps quickened, their unease palpable. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the deserted street, causing them all to jump. Mara whirled around, her heart pounding, to find that one of the crew's camera tripods had fallen to the ground, its metal legs scattered across the pavement. What the hell? Jake exclaimed, rushing to inspect the damaged equipment. Mara's gaze swept the area, searching for any sign of an explanation, but the street remained eerily silent. This isn't an accident, she murmured, her voice low and tense. Something's going on here. The crew members gathered around the fallen tripod, their faces pale with unease. Mara's mind raced, trying to make sense of the strange occurrences they had witnessed since arriving in Ravenswood. The town's secrets were beginning to unravel, and she knew they were only scratching the surface. Turning to the group, Mara's expression hardened with determination. We're not leaving here until we've uncovered the truth. I don't care what it takes. This town is hiding something, and I'm going to find out what it is. With a shared nod, the crew followed Mara as she led them deeper into the heart of Ravenswood, the whispers of the past echoing all around them. Mara Chen's fingers trembled as she pushed open the heavy oak doors of the abandoned church. The building's once grand facade had crumbled over the years, the stained glass windows shattered and the intricate stonework worn by the elements. A sense of unease settled over her as she stepped into the shadowy interior, her footsteps echoing against the vaulted ceiling. This is it, James Holloway said, his voice low and measured. I believe the answers you're looking for lie beneath us. Mara took a deep breath, pushing down the rising tide of skepticism. After the unsettling incidents that had plagued her film crew over the past few days, she couldn't ignore the growing evidence that there was more to Ravenswood's history than met the eye. Lead the way, she replied, steeling herself for whatever they might find. James led Mara to the back of the sanctuary, where a set of crumbling stone stairs descended into darkness. Mara hesitated for a moment, the flickering shadows seeming to beckon her downward. But with a resolute nod, she followed close behind James. the beam of their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The staircase opened into a spacious chamber, its walls lined with ancient shelves and pedestals. Mara's eyes widened as she took in the sight. The room was filled with an array of arcane artifacts, from tarnished metal amulets to leather-bound tomes with eldritch symbols embossed on their spines. "What is this place?" Mara asked, her gaze sweeping across the chamber. "The heart of Ravenswood's occult history," James replied, his tone somber. "This was where the founding families would gather to perform their rituals, to commune with forces beyond our understanding." He paused, his eyes narrowing, as he studied an intricately carved wooden idol on a nearby pedestal. "And it seems they left quite a legacy behind." Mara stepped closer to the idol, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns etched into the surface. A shiver ran down her spine, and she couldn't help but feel as if the carved eyes were watching her, judging her. "Be careful," James warned. "Some of these artifacts are imbued with dark power. We must tread lightly." Nodding, Mara pulled her hand away, her mind racing. If this chamber truly held the secrets to Ravenswood's past, then perhaps it also held the key to unraveling the mystery of the recent disappearances. She began to search the shelves, her fingers skimming over tattered leather spines and chipped ceramic vessels. Time seemed to slow as Mara delved deeper into the chamber's collection, her skepticism gradually giving way to a growing sense of unease. The air felt thick and heavy, as if the very walls were pressing in on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that some unseen presence was observing her every move. Suddenly, Mara's hand brushed against a small stone tablet, its surface covered in a series of intricate carvings. As her fingers made contact with the artifact, a jolt of energy shot through her, causing her to recoil in surprise. "What the?" She stared at the tablet, her heart pounding. A low, ominous rumbling filled the chamber, the very foundation shaking beneath their feet. James rushed to her side, his eyes wide with alarm. "We've disturbed something," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "We need to get out of here now." Mara didn't need to be told twice. Clutching the stone tablet, she followed James as he hurried towards the staircase, the chamber quaking around them. As they ascended, the rumbling grew louder, accompanied by the sound of crumbling stone and splintering wood. They burst out into the church's main sanctuary, just as the floor behind them gave way, revealing a gaping chasm that swallowed the artifacts and antiquities within. Mara and James stumbled backwards, watching in horror as the chamber collapsed in on itself, swallowed by the darkness. For a long moment, the only sound was their own ragged breathing, the echoes of the destruction fading into silence. Mara stared at the stone tablet in her hand, her mind racing. "What have we done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. James placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression grim. "We've awakened something that was meant to remain buried," he said solemnly. "And now Ravenswood will pay the price." Outside, the sky had darkened, storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Mara couldn't shake the feeling that the town was about to be plunged into a darkness from which it might never emerge. The town of Ravenswood shuddered as the entity's power surged through the streets, its malevolent presence seeping into every corner. Mara Chen stood frozen, her rational mind struggling to comprehend the reality unfolding before her eyes. Tremors rippled through the ground, causing the windows of the old Victorian buildings to rattle ominously. Shadows seemed to shift and swell, as if alive with a sinister sentience. Mara's film crew huddled together, their faces etched with terror. "We need to get out of here," Mara, her assistant Sarah, pleaded. "This place is not right. Something is terribly wrong." Mara hesitated, her gaze drawn to the abandoned church on the edge of town. She knew the answers she sought lay within those crumbling walls, even if her mind rebelled against the supernatural truth. "No," Mara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "We came to uncover the truth, and that's what we're going to do." James Holloway approached, his expression grave. "Ms. Chen, I think it's time we had a more in-depth discussion about Ravenswood's history. There are things you need to understand." Mara nodded, steeling herself for the revelations to come. As they made their way to James' home, the air seemed to thicken with a palpable sense of unease, as if the very fabric of reality had been stretched thin, allowing the shadows to encroach. Once inside the modest Victorian house, James gestured for Mara to take a seat, He moved to the fireplace, stoking the flames until they crackled to life, casting a warm glow over the room. Mara noticed his hands trembling slightly, a stark contrast to his previously composed demeanor. Ravenswood has always been a town with a dark secret, James began, his voice low and measured, one that has been carefully guarded for generations. But now it seems that secret has been disturbed. Mara listened intently as James recounted the history of Ravenswood's founding families, their involvement in occult practices, and the unspeakable rituals performed within the hidden chamber beneath the abandoned church. The details chilled her to the bone, causing her rational mind to reel. You're telling me that my town, my home, has been a haven for a cult of devil worshippers? Mara asked, her disbelief palpable. James nodded solemnly. I'm afraid so. The entity we've awakened is an ancient, malevolent force that has been dormant for generations, and now it seeks to reclaim what it believes is rightfully its own. Mara stood, pacing the room as she processed the information. Then how do we stop it? How do we put this thing back to sleep? I'm not entirely sure, James admitted, his brow furrowed in concern. The rituals and practices of my ancestors are not something I've ever wanted to be a part of, but I know that the power they harnessed is not something to be trifled with. A sudden crash from outside made them both jump. Mara rushed to the window, her breath catching in her throat as she witnessed the entity's manifestation. Tendrils of inky darkness coiled and writhed, seeping through the cracks in the walls and windows surrounding the house. We need to get the others, Mara said, her voice trembling. We need to warn them. This thing is spreading, and it won't stop until it consumes the entire town. James nodded, his face etched with a mixture of fear and determination. Then we must act quickly. I'll gather the remaining townsfolk. We need to perform a counter-ritual, an exorcism of sorts, to banish this dark force from our home. As they hurried outside, Mara couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The entity's power was undeniable, and she couldn't shake the lingering doubts that had plagued her since arriving in Ravenswood. But she knew that she had to face her fears head-on, for the sake of the town and her own sanity. The streets were in chaos, with terrified residents fleeing their homes as the shadows seemed to close in around them. Mara and James worked quickly, gathering the remaining brave souls who were willing to confront the entity. We must go to the church, James shouted over the din of the chaos. That is where the ritual must be performed. It is the only way to stop this abomination. Mara followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. As they approached the towering, dilapidated structure, she couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the shadows seemed to cling to the crumbling walls, as if the building itself was alive with a malevolent presence. Steeling her nerves, Mara stepped through the heavy oak doors, her gaze sweeping the interior. The once grand sanctuary had fallen into disrepair, the pews rotting and the stained glass windows cracked and weathered. But it was the site of the hidden chamber, the remnants of the occult ritual still visible, that truly unnerved her. As the group gathered in the chamber, Mara felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that they were treading on dangerous ground, tapping into forces that defied all rational explanation. But with no other choice, she steadied her resolve and joined the others in the ritual, determined to confront the entity and put an end to Ravenswood's dark legacy. The air hung thick with tension as Mara, James, and the remaining townspeople gathered at the dilapidated church on the outskirts of Ravenswood. The entity's influence had spread like a malignant cancer, claiming more victims with each passing day. Mara could feel the weight of the town's dark legacy pressing down on her, a burden she was now forced to bear. James stood at the center of the makeshift ritual circle, his handsome features etched with a grave determination. We don't have much time, he said, his voice betraying a rare moment of vulnerability. The entity grows stronger with each passing hour. We must perform the counter-ritual before it's too late. Mara nodded, her gaze sweeping over the assembled group. The once vibrant community had been reduced to a collection of haunted, hollow-eyed individuals, their spirits broken by the horrors that had befallen Ravenswood. She recognized the fear and resignation in their faces, a reflection of the turmoil that raged within her own soul. "I know this isn't easy," Mara said, her voice steady despite the tremor of uncertainty that threatened to undermine her confidence. "But we have to do this. For the sake of the town, for the sake of all those who have been taken by the darkness." The townspeople exchanged uneasy glances, but there was a newfound resolve in their eyes. They had seen the entity's power firsthand, and they knew that if they did not act, Ravenswood would be lost forever. James cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the task at hand. "The ritual requires a specific set of materials and a delicate sequence of steps. We must be precise, or the consequences could be devastating." Mara felt a chill run down her spine at his words, but she refused to let her fear consume her. She had come too far to back down now. "Tell us what to do," she said, her gaze unwavering. As James began to explain the intricate details of the counter-ritual, Mara couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The stakes were higher than ever, and the weight of responsibility on her shoulders threatened to crush her. But she knew that she had no choice but to see this through, no matter the personal cost. The townspeople moved with a practiced efficiency, gathering the required items and arranging them within the ritual circle. Mara watched, her mind racing as she tried to anticipate the entity's next move. She could feel its presence, a malevolent force that seemed to seep into every corner of the church, taunting her with its power. As the final preparations were made, Mara caught James' eye. There was a glimmer of something in his gaze, a flicker of doubt, or perhaps a sliver of fear. She realized then that he too was grappling with the gravity of the situation, his own family legacy casting a long shadow over the proceedings. "Are you ready?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mara took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battle to come. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her determination unwavering. With a nod, James turned to the others and began the incantation, his voice resonating through the dark, cavernous space. The air crackled with energy, and Mara could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. The townspeople joined in, their chanting rising in a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the church. Suddenly the ground trembled, and a deafening roar echoed through the chamber. Mara's heart pounded in her chest as the entity materialized before them, its form a swirling mass of shadows and malice. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and the faces of the townspeople contorted with terror. Mara steeled herself, refusing to back down. She knew that the only way to defeat the entity was to confront it head-on, to draw upon the strength she had found in the depths of her own personal darkness. With a surge of determination, she joined the others in the chanting, her voice rising clear and strong above the chaos. As the ritual reached its climax, the entity lashed out, its tendrils of darkness reaching for the participants. Mara watched in horror as some of the townspeople were swept up in the entity's grasp, their agonized screams echoing through the church. James fought to maintain the integrity of the ritual, his brow furrowed in concentration. Mara felt the weight of the world on her shoulders as she realized that the success of the counter-ritual depended on her own ability to confront her deepest fears. She knew that she could no longer hide from the traumatic events of her past, that the only way to defeat the entity was to face it head-on, to draw upon the strength she had forged in the crucible of her own suffering. With a deep breath, Mara stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she stared down the entity. In that moment, all of her doubts and skepticism melted away, replaced by a steely determination and a newfound sense of purpose. She knew what she had to do, and she was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice to save Ravenswood. As the ritual reached its climactic conclusion, Mara felt the weight of the entity's power pressing down on her, threatening to overwhelm her. But she refused to yield, her mind focused on the task at hand, her spirit fortified by the knowledge that she was fighting for something greater than herself. In a desperate final act, Mara flung herself into the heart of the entity's malevolent force, her body becoming a conduit for the counter-ritual's energy. The town watched in stunned silence as Mara's form was engulfed by the swirling darkness, her anguished cries echoing through the church. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the entity's grip on Ravenswood began to unravel. The darkness receded, and the townspeople stared in awe as the malevolent force was slowly vanquished, its power dissipating into the ether. In the eerie silence that followed, Mara lay motionless on the floor, her face haggard and pale. James rushed to her side, his features etched with a mixture of relief and concern. "Mara," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Can you hear me?" Mara's eyes fluttered open, and she gazed up at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. I did it," she murmured. "The entity, it's gone." The townspeople gathered around her, their expressions a tapestry of gratitude and disbelief. Mara had faced the darkness head-on, and in doing so she had saved them all. As the sun rose on a new day in Ravenswood, Mara knew that the battle was not yet over. The town's dark legacy would continue to cast a long shadow, and the scars of the past would not be easily healed. But she also knew that she had the strength and the determination to help the community confront its demons, to guide them towards a brighter future. With a renewed sense of purpose, Mara rose to her feet, her gaze sweeping over the gathered townspeople. She had faced her deepest fears and emerged victorious, and she was ready to embrace the challenges that lay ahead. The air inside the ancient church was thick with tension and an undercurrent of fear. Mara stood alongside James and the remaining townspeople, each holding a lit candle that flickered in the shadowy interior. The symbols and arcane markings that adorned the walls seemed to pulsate with an ominous energy, a testament to the dark legacy that had taken root in this hallowed space. Mara's heart raced as she surveyed the makeshift ritual circle they had hastily constructed. This was their final chance to confront the malevolent entity and banish it from Ravenswood forever. Yet, despite the gravity of the situation, a part of her still struggled to fully accept the supernatural reality they now faced. James' voice cut through the eerie silence, guiding the group through the intricate steps of the counter-ritual. His usual charm and confidence had been replaced by a somber determination, the weight of his family's dark history evident in every word. As the ritual progressed, the air began to crackle with a palpable energy. Mara felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end, her senses heightened to the slightest shift in the shadows. The flickering candlelight cast distorted shapes on the walls, and she had to resist the urge to flinch at every fleeting movement. Suddenly, the lights in the church began to flicker and sputter, plunging the room into intermittent darkness. A low, ominous rumble echoed through the ancient structure, and Mara felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced around nervously, seeing the same sense of dread mirrored on the faces of the other participants. "It's here," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We must continue the ritual. Quickly, now." The group redoubled their efforts, their voices rising in a desperate chant. Mara closed her eyes, trying to focus on the words and movements. But her mind was consumed by the memory of that fateful night so many years ago, the night that had shattered her belief in the rational world and plunged her into a lifetime of doubt and cynicism. As the chanting reached a crescendo, the church suddenly shook with an otherworldly force. Mara opened her eyes to see the entity's manifestation, a swirling vortex of shadows and malevolent energy that threatened to consume them all. The townspeople scattered in panic, their candles extinguished, leaving Mara and James alone to face the entity's wrath. Mara felt the weight of her past failures pressing down on her, threatening to overwhelm her resolve. "Mara, you must confront it," James shouted, his voice strained with effort. "Only you have the power to banish it." Mara hesitated, her doubts and fears threatening to paralyze her. But as the entity's tendrils reached out towards her, she knew that she had no choice. This was the moment she had been running from her entire life, the moment when she had to confront the supernatural head-on. Steeling her nerves, Mara stepped forward, holding her candle aloft. She met the entity's gaze, feeling its malevolent energy probing her mind, searching for her weaknesses. Memories of that fateful night flooded her consciousness. The trauma and guilt she had tried so hard to bury now resurfacing with a vengeance. Yet, in the midst of her turmoil, Mara found a glimmer of strength and determination to confront her past and protect the town from the entity's wrath. She closed her eyes, focusing her mind on the ritual chant, channeling the power of the counter-ritual to push back against the entity's influence. The air crackled with energy as Mara and the entity engaged in a battle of wills, their forces colliding in a dizzying clash of light and shadow. Mara felt her very being straining against the entity's grip, her sanity hanging by a thread as she fought to maintain her focus. In a desperate moment, Mara realized that the ritual's success would require a great sacrifice, a sacrifice that she alone could make. With a surge of courage, she stepped forward, extinguishing her candle and plunging the church into darkness. "Mara!" No, James cried, reaching out to her, but it was too late. Mara felt the entity's tendrils wrap around her, dragging her into the swirling vortex of darkness. She let out a guttural scream, the sound echoing through the church as she surrendered herself to the entity's power. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Mara's consciousness slipped away, her mind becoming consumed by the entity's malevolent energy. In that moment, she understood the true nature of the sacrifice required: a willingness to confront her own deepest fears and personal demons to vanquish the darkness that threatened to consume them all. As the entity's grip tightened around her, Mara's final thoughts were of the town she had come to save, and the haunting realization that some secrets were better left buried. With a final burst of determination, she channeled the last of her strength into the counter ritual, praying that it would be enough to banish the entity from Ravenswood forever. The church trembled with the force of the entity's dying scream, the shadows receding as the light slowly returned. James and the remaining townspeople emerged from their hiding places, battered but alive, staring in awe at the sight before them. Mara's lifeless body lay at the center of the ritual circle, the candle extinguished, and the entity nowhere to be seen. A hush fell over the room, the weight of her sacrifice hanging heavy in the air. In the aftermath, the town of Ravenswood began the long process of healing, the lingering presence of the supernatural no longer a constant threat. Yet, Mara's memory would forever be etched into the fabric of the community, a reminder of the fragility of the line between reality and the unknown, and the power of confronting one's personal demons. As the townspeople gathered to honor Mara's sacrifice, James stood apart, his eyes filled with a mix of grief and resolve. He knew that the battle against the entity was not over, and that the town's dark legacy would continue to cast a long shadow. But with Mara's sacrifice as a guiding light, he was determined to help Ravenswood confront its past and forge a new path forward, one that acknowledged the existence of the supernatural and the importance of never again taking it for granted. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey through Shadows of Ravenswood. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notified of our latest uploads. Share this adventure with your friends, and stay tuned for more spine-chilling tales. Until next time, keep your courage strong and your lights on.